1917 stands tall as one of director Sam Mendes' best films. The trailers for two big horror movies hit the internet. Ricky Gervais does the near impossible and manages to make the Golden Globe Awards worth watching. I give not only my final Academy Award nomination predictions, but also my top 10 films of 2019. I'm Joe Acierno. This is Real Talk. Okay, so I'm going to start things off by reviewing 1917. 1917 is the latest film from director Sam Mendes, and it takes us back to the First World War, and it follows two young British soldiers who were assigned to deliver a message to another British battalion. That particular British battalion is about to launch an attack on the German war front, and without them knowing, that British battalion is also about to walk into a trap. So these two young British soldiers have to deliver the message to the battalion that's walking into the trap, basically saying to call off the attack, and if they don't get there in time before the British launch their crusade, the British will lose 1,600 men, which also just happens to include one of the brothers of one of the men who was assigned the task. Now, honestly, in my opinion, this is one of the best films of the year. This could definitely stand as one of the most unique war films I've ever seen. The big reason for that is because what they try to do in this film is basically the same thing that they tried to do with Birdman, which is the cinematography that they employ here has to do with a lot of long takes, seamless editing that makes it seem like everything is done in one shot, when of course everything isn't. That's impossible. You can't do that, but they managed to find a way to just hide all the cuts and make it seem like everything is just one continuous flowing action. Of course, that was impressive with Birdman, but the scale and scope that Birdman is on obviously isn't the same as 1917. Birdman is a dark comedy that takes place in the inner workings of this Broadway, New York City theater house, and 1917 is this huge epic war film. So, of course, doing that one-shot illusion comes with many more challenges when the scope is this big. And I am in awe of how they pulled this off. The main question that I was asking myself throughout this entire film was, how did they do that? This is easily one of the most ambitious productions I've ever seen in a film. Not only because of, just like I said, the constant flowing action. And a lot of these action sequences that are thrilling, that are obviously very, very intense. There's a lot going on. And I can't imagine what the orchestration process must have been like to weave all of these action sequences, these war battles together. There's one scene in particular where one of the men is by himself and he's running away from a bunch of German soldiers, and it's pitch black at night, but the only lighting is coming from a nearby fire. There's a huge fire that just happens to be lighting up the whole place. And how they managed to capture all of this action in the midst of the only lighting source being this gigantic fire that just happens to be going on next to the town that this man is trapped in. I just couldn't. I'm still wondering how they managed to do that. And of course, this isn't the only action sequence of its kind in this film. I am looking at what Sam Mendes has done with just this alone is honestly inspiring. And even if this movie had almost nothing else to offer other than, again, the action sequences, the cinematography, the editing illusions, this movie would be an unforgettable experience alone. But, of course, there's more to it than just all the action sequences, than just the visual treatment that this film has. The two lead actors in this film playing the two young British soldiers are Dean Charles Chapman and George McKay, and they both give wonderful performances. They are so believable as these terrified young men that are just thrown in the midst of this situation. They're both obviously very motivated as to the task at hand. They both care very much about serving their country, but of course they're scared of just not making it through to see the day. And everything, every facial expression, every cry of horror, or every terrified expression that they give is just so believable. That, of course, contributes to the human emotion that this film honestly offers a lot of. in a lot of war movies, you do see, you know, these men, these soldiers telling stories of like, back home and whatnot. But for whatever reason, and even though I picked up on that in this film when it was happening here, it seemed to be done in a way that it didn't feel like it was just me listening to the same thing over and over again that I'd heard in so many other movies before. These, even though these characters aren't necessarily larger than life, they have a very everyman quality to them. And that, I think, of course, makes it, I don't know if I can say it makes it that much more relatable, because, of course, I've never served. Most people that I know have never served in the Army. But I think it makes it that much scarier that these average people, these ordinary people, are just thrown into this situation, for, of course, from being drafted, of course, from just, like, again, being assigned this task really out of nowhere. So, as much as this film has going on for it technically and visually, there's a lot of humanity to this film. And then, of course, before I cap this off, I just have to give shout-outs to the production design, the sound design, and the sound design and the musical score work very well together, because what I noticed with a lot of films is that a lot of films will have a really strong musical score, but they're played so low that you forget that there's even music playing. What I loved that Sam Mendes did with here, Thomas Newman writes a beautiful score for this film. It's Sam Mendes gives Thomas Newman the chance to show off what he's got, to really let the score do its work in adding that much more emotion, adding that much more tension to each and every scene that it's allowed to swell up in. Now, in terms of awards contention, this already won at the Golden Globes a few nights ago. Won Best Picture Drama, Best Director for Sam Mendes, and I think it's going to contend all across the board in those same two categories, as well as music, cinematography, editing, sound design, and production design. So, just to cap things off, armed with arresting cinematography, a standout musical score, and mesmerizing war sequences that make it thrilling in both its production and storytelling, 1917 is an immaculate piece of filmmaking that never forgets the humanity needed to face the horrors of war. I'm going to give 1917 a 96. Okay, so moving forward, I love how the morning that I make the announcement on social media as to what this particular episode was going to be about, as far as the topics that I was going to discuss, literally within an hour or two later, they released the new trailer for the New Mutants. And I thought to myself, okay, there's no way I can't talk about this now. This is just coming out. This needs to be a part of the show. So, New Mutants, of course, for those who aren't familiar with this, New Mutants follows a new generation of, I guess, X-Men-like figures who, of course, are struggling with their coming to terms and learning to control their own powers. These 5 mutants are locked in a maximum security facility against their will, and they must find a way to not only confront the demons of their own past, but, like I said, come to terms with their own powers and escape from their captivity. And I guess must do it in, I'm assuming, a somewhat honorable way, because, of course, they are supposed to be superheroes, or at least, allegedly they're supposed to be superheroes. That's what, of course, is always assumed when it comes to the protagonists in a Marvel story. So, now, when it comes to this film, I remember them showing trailers for this in theaters at least a year ago. And this movie has been pushed back in its release date so many times. There's been so much confusion going on with it. I think it has a lot to do with the Disney and Fox merger. Are they still going to move forward with this? Is this something that Disney is going to want on their docket, considering the creepier edge that this film definitely seems to have to it? Don't get me wrong. I think it looks very interesting. I think having a new sort of horror edge to it is something new. It definitely feels like it's something that they haven't done before, or at least in a while. And I think taking this again, I never read the comics. I'm not much of a comic book guy. I don't know too much about the stories, but at least from what I've seen from the X-Men films, the direction, or at least the inclusion of this new story with the direction that they're taking this particular story in definitely intrigues me a lot. I've definitely come more in tune to being able to watch horror movies within the last 3 years. So I'm definitely intrigued as to where they take this in terms of just like the new creative feel for an X-Men film. Cast looks interesting. You have Maisie Williams from Game of Thrones. I'm guilty as charged. Never actually got into Game of Thrones. Always wanted to, just never happened. You have Jonathan Heaton from Stranger Things. Antonio Banderas from, of course, my generation I think knows him from Spy Kids the most. You also have Alice Barker from I Am Legend and Anya Taylor-Joy from The Witch. So the cast definitely looks interesting as far as other pedigree behind the film. I can't say there's too much that stands out to me, but I think that's fine. Just a couple things that are kind of putting me that are popping up as some kind of red flag. As I mentioned before, there have been multiple pushbacks for this film's release. I remember, like I said, seeing trailers for this back in like 2018, 2019, and of course, do films need to be pushed back sometimes? Yes, of course, but usually that's not the best sign in the world. Again, is that always the case? No. Ad Astra, the newest film with Brad Pitt, that sci-fi film, was pushed back at least once or twice, and that turned out to be an excellent film. So sometimes it's just necessary. I'm hoping that the reason for the pushbacks for this film was, again, because of the whole merger with Disney and Fox. So I'm hoping that doesn't have too much of an impact on the overall quality of this film. And also, this film, as of now, isn't currently set in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I'm wondering if that's going to be a problem, if the film's going to feel like something's missing by not having it included in the MCU. I think this brings up the question, is there a place for any Marvel films outside of the MCU at this point? I think this film's going to be the answer to that question, especially now that you have most of the X-Men. That after the Disney-Fox merger, you have X-Men coming under the same roof as the rest of the MCU films. You also have Fantastic Four. So I want to see what happens with this. But overall, I'm still intrigued in the film. I think it'll end up being fine. I hope it'll end up being fine. Honestly, I don't know for sure, but I hope it'll end up being fine. Alright, so this past Sunday night was the 77th Golden Globe Awards, and the show actually ended up being pretty interesting, to say the least. Whether it's for the right reasons or the wrong reasons, I'm going to leave that up to you. But before I get into the meat of this particular topic, Tom Hanks was awarded the Cecil B. DeMille Award, and he gave a very emotional and very touching speech. Tom Hanks is known throughout Hollywood as one of the nicest guys in the business, and this speech only seemed to amplify that even more. Congrats to him, and I thought his speech was very, very nice. Same with Ellen DeGeneres accepting the Carol Burnett Award. If I'm not mistaken, this is the first year they're doing this particular award, and I think she's a pretty solid recipient. She seems to be a genuinely funny person. I think she hosted the Oscars a few years ago, and at least within the last few years, she was definitely one of the better Oscar hosts, at least in my memory. So, and her speech again was also very touching, talking a lot about her struggles in the industry as well. So, props to her. Yeah, now that I have those out of the way, the main reason why this particular ceremony is going to be so memorable is because of the one and only Ricky Gervais. Ricky Gervais hosted the show for the 5th time, and he, as for all the other times that he's hosted the show, he is the only reason to still watch this ceremony. I would love to see him host the Oscars. Just because the reason why is that Ricky Gervais has really come out swinging within the last couple of years in terms of his comedy routines as just this guy who just does not care. He's not affected by any of the sensitivity, by any of the flat out bullshit that goes on in Hollywood. He doesn't goose step in line with the rest of Hollywood. And this was on full display last night because let me tell you, if you haven't heard at this point, he dragged the entire Hollywood, Camelot Castle image through the mud. Every single shot that deserved to be lobbed at Hollywood, he lobbed it at them. He made jokes about Jeffrey Epstein. He made jokes about Harvey Weinstein. He even said for people, if they win awards, not to not to make political speeches because he basically said they're in no position to make political speeches of any kind. They know nothing about the world. This is just in the opening monologue alone. Of course, he was funny throughout the rest of the show, but just in the opening monologue alone, he said so much in so little time. And the best part was that with everything he said, he was so on point. Now, here's the thing. Of course, after he said not to give political speeches, were there political speeches throughout the rest of the ceremony? Of course. I think that Hollywood has come to the point where they can't just seem to help themselves. And this inability to help themselves, I think, is definitely very much reflected in the distaste that's been growing for these award shows, because the Golden Globes, even this time around, as much as the viewership for these shows have been declining, the Golden Globes this time around actually managed to hit a new low. Like I said, I think a lot of people are looking up Ricky Gervais' monologue just based on word of mouth alone, but I think that Hollywood just seems to live in its own bubble, and I think it just leads them to just constantly shove their opinions down everyone's throats and preach to people who honestly just don't want to be preached. I think that it's very interesting when people say that, like, oh, this person said this at the awards last night. Oh, it was so brave. Brave is a word. Brave and courageous are words I hear get tossed around a lot when it comes to all these political speeches. But if I'm going to be honest, there is absolutely nothing brave about standing up in a room full of people you know are going to agree with you and say something controversial. And what I have to say that Ricky Gervais did was actually very brave, because he said everything that he said, pointing out all the hypocrisy and bullshit that Hollywood gives off. He said everything knowing for a fact that he was going to piss off the vast majority of that room. That, to me, is bravery. And like I said, it was stuff that needed to be said. It was stuff that was right on point. It was calling out Hollywood and basically the motion picture industry for exactly what it is. And honestly, I think it was a long time coming. I don't know. There have been a lot of people out there calling out Hollywood for everything that it is, but no one has done it in this particular venue, at this particular sweet spot, just like Ricky Gervais did. He kept saying throughout the show, "This is my last time, I don't care," but he's been saying that the last few times, if I'm not mistaken, but I would be very surprised if he does not. I wouldn't be surprised if he doesn't get invited back the next time around, but I think it would be smart on NBC to keep inviting him back, because, like I said, he is the only reason to watch this show. This show, honestly, like I said, it's just a precursor for the Oscars. It's nothing penultimate. You got all the pomp and circumstance, the unnecessary pomp and circumstance that comes with an award show, but it's not even the big payoff. It's the Golden Globes. It's not the Oscars. So it just doesn't feel like it's worth it. Again, I only watched it because of Ricky Gervais. He proved once again to be the only reason to watch the show. But him hosting is probably one of the greatest television producing decisions I've ever seen. So to Ricky Gervais, he's officially marched himself into legendhood in my book. I just hope he keeps doing what he's doing. He is just absolutely incredible. So to Ricky Gervais, props to you. Alright, so a few days ago, the official trailer for A Quiet Place Part 2 was released on the internet. Now, for those of you who aren't familiar with this is the follow-up to the 2018 box office smash, A Quiet Place, and this franchise follows a family who lives in a world and struggles to survive in a world where the planet is invaded by blind monsters who hunt by sound. And they just have to learn to live their lives and make a living in such a perilous and dangerous situation. They have to do their most to just not make any noise, because if they make any noise, the acute hearing of the monsters will pick them up and they will go after them and kill them. So I loved the first movie so much. And what I loved about it is that this film is only an hour and a half long, but it felt longer than that. Not because the film was slow, not because it was boring, because there was so much that they managed to fit into this 90-minute runtime without it feeling overstuffed or without it feeling undercooked. And one of the things that gets me excited for this one is that even though, spoiler alert, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, John Krasinski's character dies in the first film, he's at least coming back. He's still going to be involved with the second film as well. He's directing and he wrote the screenplay for the sequel. And this makes me happy because when you have the creative team from the first film returning for this one, they have the most intimacy with the characters in the world that they've created. So I trust them the most to go in the right direction, in the direction that just feels natural with these characters. I mean, just look at what happened with the Star Wars new trilogy. You had J.J. Abrams and Rian Johnson having two different agendas. Look what happened. It was just much messier than it should have been. But going back to this film, based on what I've seen, at least in the trailer, I'm excited for the directions that they can take this in. Because I always wondered in the first film, like, you know, how many other people are out there, because at least for a while it gives off the impression that they're the only ones left, except for this one older man who, you know, gets killed as well. So I want to see how the remaining Abbott family members deal with other people outside of their own home. And I think there's just a lot of potential as to what they could do. Like, you know, is it worth saving these people? Is it not worth saving these people? What exactly has changed everybody? What exactly has changed the world outside of the Abbott family? Other than, of course, like, you know, there are monsters running around everywhere. Because I think there's more that you could tap into than just people just trying to survive monsters. I think there's a huge question about, you know, humanity and what you can do in the face of all that, in the face of everything that's going on. So I just want to see exactly how the rest of the world has changed besides the Abbott family. There's a sequence that they show in the trailer. They show day one where the monsters first invade Earth. And just what they show in that alone is just absolutely crazy. And that alone just makes me... It reassures me that they haven't lost the thrilling and just horrific edge that the first film had. I say horrific, of course, as a compliment, but it's just it's nice to know that they haven't lost their mojo from the first film, at least for this one. Again, like I said, trailers will only say so much, but that makes me very confident. And of course, you know, you have a lot of the cast coming back. You know, you have Emily Blunt, who was terrific in the first film, Noah Jupe, Millicent Simmons. You have some new faces, Cillian Murphy, Jimon Honsu, hope I'm saying his name right. So just the combo that they have of new and old, I think is very promising. So, and then the film doesn't come out, the film comes out in March, I believe March 20th. And I forgot to mention before, New Mutants comes out April 3rd, as of now. We'll see if that changes. But this film comes out in March, and even though I knew they were doing a sequel, it still surprised me when I saw a trailer and I saw the release date, and I thought, oh wow, I don't have to wait that long. So it's nice to know that I don't have to wait. I don't have to wait until the summer to at least be able to see a decent movie. So I have a lot of confidence in this one. The only thing that I could see potentially as I don't think this would be so much of a problem, but John Krasinski's character in the first film, at least in my opinion, he was the emotional anchor of the film, and now that he's not there, is part 2 going to have the same impact that part 1 had? Now that John Krasinski's character just isn't in the picture anymore, but I think they'll find ways to fill that gap. You know, they've shown their level of competence with the first film and being able to tell an emotionally engaging story in the midst of all these horrific things going on. So I have faith in them to fill the gap with something new. Alright, so now I am going to get into my final predictions for the major categories for the Academy Award nominations. Now, just a couple of disclaimers. There are a few categories that I honestly just don't pay too much attention to, or I just haven't seen enough of the films to really make any kind of predictions. For example, documentary short, an animated short. I got nothing for you on those. They changed the Best Foreign Language Feature Film to Best International Film. Not really sure what the big deal was there, but maybe I'm wrong. I haven't seen too many of those this year. The only ones that I have seen are Pain and Glory from Spain and Parasite from South Korea. I expect those to make it into the top 5 on Oscar nomination morning. Same with documentary feature. So now I'm going to get into the categories that I actually have an idea as to what I'm talking about. First category I'm going to look at is Best Animated Feature. You can expect, I believe, Frozen 2, How to Train Your Dragon 3, Toy Story 4, Missing Link, and now for the last link, a lot of people might go with Abominable, and Abominable could very well end up in the top 5 list in the morning of the nominations. But I'm gonna go for my last pick. I'm gonna go with the Lion King, because even though the reactions for this film were very mixed, let's also not forget there are some groundbreaking visuals in there. Film made a lot of money, and let's also not forget all-star cast. Jon Favreau directed it, and Disney is also behind the film. So of course Disney is a very big player. So just to say it straight out, my predicted nominees for Best Animated Feature are Frozen 2, How to Train Your Dragon: The Hidden World, The Lion King, Missing Link, and Toy Story 4. Okay, so for Best Supporting Actor, there are a lot of really, really great contenders here. There are a lot of fantastic supporting performances here in the male category. A couple potential spoilers and alternates that I could see, even if they're not making it in my top 5 for now. I could definitely see Willem Dafoe for The Lighthouse sneaking in there. I could see Shia LaBeouf in Honey Boy. He played his own father. That was also a very captivating and moving performance. Of course, Jamie Foxx for Mercy has been getting a lot of buzz. Same with Sam Rockwell for Richard Jewell. But none of those are in my top 5 as of now. So my final predicted nominees for Best Supporting Actor are Tom Hanks in A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood for playing Fred Rogers, Anthony Hopkins in The Two Popes for playing Pope Benedict XVI, Al Pacino in The Irishman for playing Jimmy Hoffa, Joe Pesci in The Irishman for playing Russell Buffalino, and Brad Pitt in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood for playing Cliff Booth. My predicted nominees for Best Supporting Actress are Laura Dern in Marriage Story for playing Nora Fanchar, Scarlett Johansson in Jojo Rabbit for playing Rosie Betzler, Florence Pugh in Little Women for playing Amy March, Margot Robbie in Bombshell for playing Kayla Pospisil, hope I'm saying her name right, and Susan Chow in The Farewell for playing Nai Nai. Okay, for Best Actor, once again, another very, very, very packed race. My final predicted nominees for Best Actor are Leonardo DiCaprio in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood for playing Rick Dalton, Adam Driver in Marriage Story for playing Charlie Barber, Taron Egerton in Rocketman for playing Elton John, Joaquin Phoenix in Joker for playing Arthur Fleck / Joker, and last but certainly not least, Adam Sandler in Uncut Gems for playing Howard Ratner. So, moving on to Best Actress. Now, a lot of very strong performances, getting, of course, a lot of buzz. My final predicted nominees for Best Actress are Awkwafina in The Farewell for playing Billy Wang, Scarlett Johansson in Marriage Story for playing Nicole Barber, Lupita Nyong'o in Us for playing Adelaide Wilson / Red, Saoirse Ronan in Little Women for playing Jo March, and Renee Zellweger in Judy for playing Judy Garland. Now, moving on to a couple of my favorite categories, the screenplay categories. My predicted nominees for Best Adapted Screenplay are The Irishman, written by Steven Zaillian, based on the book I Heard You Paint Houses by Charles Brandt, Jojo Rabbit, written by Taika Waititi, based on the novel Caging Skies by Christine Lunens, Joker, Todd Phillips and Scott Silver, based on the characters created by Bob Kane, Bill Finger, and Jerry Robinson, Little Women, Greta Gerwig, based on the novel Little Women by Louisa May Alcott, and The Two Popes, Anthony McCartan, based on the play The Pope by Anthony McCartan. My predicted nominees for Best Original Screenplay are Knives Out, Rian Johnson, Marriage Story, Noah Baumbach, Parasite, Jin-Won Han and Bong Joon-ho, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, Quentin Tarantino, and Uncut Gems, Ronald Brownstein, Benny Safdie, and Josh Safdie. Okay, now for Best Director. This is another big list as well. My 5 predicted nominees for Best Director are Noah Baumbach for Marriage Story, Bong Joon-ho for Parasite, Sam Mendes for 1917, Martin Scorsese for The Irishman, and Quentin Tarantino for Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Alright, and last but not least, Best Picture. For those who don't know, the Best Picture category can range between 5 and 10 nominees. My predicted nominees for Best Motion Picture of 2019 are 1917, The Irishman, Jojo Rabbit, Joker, Little Women, Marriage Story, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, Parasite, and Uncut Gems. Alright, so finally, to cap off the show today, I am going to reveal my top 10 films of 2019. And I just have to say, this has been an amazing year. Amazing year for movies. Just throughout the vast majority of this particular year, there have just been movies left and right that have gotten me so excited, that I've looked so forward to seeing, and that have lived up to my expectations and then some. I think, honestly, this makes up for a rather mediocre 2018. Not to say that there weren't any great movies or a few great movies from 2018, but just 2019 is just throwing them out there like candy, left and right. Amazing film after amazing film. And doing this particular top 10, I've been doing top 10 films for years, but of course, never here. But any time that I've done it, they haven't been nearly as hard as it's been this year. There are just a lot of, even just the amount of honorable mentions that I feel like I have to give. That just shows just how many awesome movies came out this year. So I'm gonna start off I'm just gonna do a little precursor and just give my honorable mentions. So I'm gonna give an honorable mention to Waves, Booksmart, Toy Story 4, Us, Rocketman, The Two Popes, Jojo Rabbit, and Little Women. Okay, so number 10 is Knives Out. Knives Out follows an eccentric detective as he investigates the untimely death of a wealthy patriarch that presides over a family of people with dubious character qualities, to say the least. And this film is from director Rian Johnson, and in my opinion, he has redeemed himself from The Last Jedi. I loved how clever this film was. I love how twisty it was. It has a lot of different moving pieces just to the story alone, and I thought it was all weaved together very nicely. The film deals with a lot of timely issues in a very balanced way, and I feel like those issues that it deals with serves its purpose to the story. One of the things that I loved about this film is that just about every single person in the family has substantive motivation for doing something terrible to this patriarch. Everyone had a possible motive, and of course, the big mystery is finding out who exactly did it, but it still doesn't end up being what you think. Okay, moving forward. Number 9 on my top 10 list is Avengers Endgame. Avengers Endgame is basically the final battle between the titular Avengers and the Mad Titan Thanos. I really loved what they did with this film. As per usual with the Avengers films, what makes this one so memorable are the character interactions. I love just seeing all these people from different worlds, from different backgrounds, from different teams, just coming together, and whether it's just trading jibes and jabs with each other or venting and bonding with each other, the character interactions are what separate the MCU films, the Avengers films, from so many other superhero films. And the emotional stakes throughout this entire film were obviously very, very high. You don't want anyone to of course, die. You don't want anyone to get killed off. But I love how you don't want anyone to get killed off. And they do it anyway. And I don't want to say who exactly, but they do it anyway. And I hear a lot of people say, kind of bitch and moan when a character that they like, dies in a film. But I feel like, especially in something like this, if there's no threat of the character getting offed, then there's no emotional stakes. And it's through that concept that this film handles so well, that makes the emotional payoff in this film just so memorable, just so satisfying. And on top of that, of course, the visual effects are amazing. Battle sequences are awesome. The ending finale, where it just seems like every Marvel superhero, every Marvel character, big and small, is just there for that final battle, was awesome. I think it's something that any comic book fan, any diehard MCU fan was looking forward to, and I think they got exactly what they wanted. One complaint, quote unquote, that I have, that part where all the female superheroes just happen to meet up, just happen to all be in the same spot at the same time before they go and charge in. Like, you know what I'm talking about. Yeah, just, I looked at that and I'm like, oh, come on, really? Like, it kind of just felt shoehorned in there. I didn't really believe it, but whatever. This is a superhero movie. You know, how much of it are you really supposed to believe? So it's just with all this ground that this movie covered, and it covered so well, I think it more than well earned the 3-hour runtime. Okay, so the next film on my list, number 8, is actually 1917. I just reviewed that. I gave you a whole bunch of reasons as to why that movie deserves to be seen on a big screen, see wherever you can. It goes. I forgot to mention before. It's released in IMAX on January 24th. I plan on seeing it then again. So I think you should do the same. Definitely check this one out. Easily one of the best of the year. So, number 7, Joker. Joker is the origin story, or at least a darker take on the origin story of the iconic Batman villain, the Joker. It shows the Joker starting out as Arthur Fleck, this, lonely, mentally unstable man who, the more life tosses obstacles and tosses tragedies at him, the more life just seems to get him down, the worse he becomes, the more he descends into madness. And madness, I don't know if I want to say evil, but definitely madness to say the least, which of course causes him to do the things that the Joker is now famous for. This film was helmed by Todd Phillips, who was of the Hangover fame, and I think this has been like a pretty seamless and smooth transition from comedy to drama. All of the unnerving parts of this particular story, all the blistering social commentary to the grimy aesthetic of just making Gotham City basically look like just New York City basically in the 80s, this rundown city on the verge of on the brink of just collapsing, of exploding. Joaquin Phoenix is absolutely amazing in this film. He definitely gives it his all, and from what I understand, he definitely put himself through hell to fully prepare himself for this particular role. He's received so much acclaim for it, and he deserves every single bit of acclaim that he's got. He is unnerving. He is just terrifying. He is just mesmerizing throughout the entire runtime of this film. Not to mention, of course, musical score is amazing. Just alone for the bathroom dance sequence. This is easily one of the best scored films of the year. And all of this just sends off into this incredible climax from the time that Arthur appears on the Murray Franklin show all the way to the very end. The final climax is just something that I'm not going to forget for a very, very long time. Okay, number 6 is Marriage Story. Marriage Story follows the breakdown of a married couple as they go through the divorce process while trying to not only keep their son in their lives, but also keep their civility and, decency with each other as well. Now, between Marriage Story and, Squid and the Whale, Noah Baumbach seems to have a lot to say about divorce, and it's obvious that with both of those two films, with this one more in particular, but with both of those films, he's coming from a very, very personal place when it comes to divorce, and I think he portrays that, he conveys that very, very well, very authentically. The conflict between both of the characters in this film is very balanced, and I love how you see each character is so layered, so well developed, and you see and understand not only why each character wants what they want from each other, but you also see just exactly why they no longer should be together. And this film doesn't really put a lot of emphasis on maybe there's still some hope for these two people getting back together, but no, this film right from the get-go says that no, there's no hope for this. This needs to end, but the way that they're doing this, the way that they're going about this divorce process isn't necessarily the best way as much as they are trying to do things the right way. Just a couple other things to know. Randy Newman did the score for this. His music adds such a warmth to the film that I think complements the story very well. The performances from Scarlett Johansson, the cast all around is terrific. Ray Liotta, Laura Dern, Alan Alda are all terrific, but of course the main two players are Scarlett Johansson and Adam Driver, and they're both incredible. There's this one scene where the two of them are just arguing with each other, it's the one like big explosive scene in the entire film, and that it is some of the best acting I've ever seen. I've definitely heard like people say a lot of times like all screaming is the best is like the easiest form of acting. Maybe, but that doesn't mean that it still can't be powerful. That it still can't be that even then that it still can't be powerful, but it still can't be screwed up. There's a way for people to scream and just not be taken seriously. And every time like they said something to each other in this particular scene, I couldn't help but wonder and almost be scared of what they were going to say to each other and do to each other in the next line of dialogue or the next piece of action. Okay, number 5, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. This film is Tarantino's love letter to nostalgic 1960s Hollywood, and it follows an actor on the back nine of his career and his loyal stunt double in a transitional period in Hollywood. One of the things that I loved about this is that Tarantino, like I said, obviously this is a love letter to solid old goodies Hollywood. His recreation of 1960s Tinseltown is very immersive, from the production design, from the cinematography that shows off the production design, to the soundtrack that he employs for just taking you there. All of it comes together to just make you feel like, a fly on the wall, or just, a driver in the street, or just someone working on set during this time period. The film is hilarious throughout. There are a lot of moving parts to the story that you're not exactly sure, like, what part actually has to play in the overall narrative arc of this film. But by the end, you see that it all just comes together. Not only do all these moving parts come together, but they explode. And even though this film definitely meanders a bit, there's a lot of fluff to it, I never felt like once that it dragged it down. I don't know how much I can actually say that, like, oh, I'd cut this out, I'd cut that out. But I just felt like, there's definitely fluff there. Maybe there's some stuff that didn't need to be in there, but it definitely didn't take away from the film. The two main performances, of course, Margot Robbie's great too, but the two main performances are Leonardo DiCaprio and Brad Pitt. They work very well as foils for each other. DiCaprio's like this high-strung, insecure, narcissistic actor. Brad Pitt plays this loyal, calm, cool stunt double who pretty much waits on DiCaprio's character, and the two of them have great chemistry together. They make a terrific duo. And the thing that I love the most about this film, the thing that stands out to me the most, is the finale, the final battle, quote unquote. I don't want to give away exactly what that is. I remember I saw this movie twice, and of course the first time I saw this particular sequence and I was blown away. But then of course the second time I was kind of waiting for the sequence to come up when I saw this film again, because that was the part that I was just looking forward to the most. That was the part that I enjoyed the most. And when it finally came up again, it still just ended up just being as crazy as it was the first time I saw it. So Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is definitely among my favorite films from Quentin Tarantino, easily. It might actually be my number 1. All right, number 4 for my top 10 films of 2019 is Parasite. Parasite follows a family kind of down on the dumps in terms of its finances. It's portrayed as a family in the lower class end of society, and they have a very hard time finding employment and finding ways to make a living. And when all of a sudden one of the family members manages to get a job teaching art to the daughter of a very wealthy family, and one by one they manage to not only sabotage the other workers in the family's home, but they manage to sneak all of them into working positions. That way they're all making money without letting the rich family know that this family is all related and that they're all pulling the wool over their heads. This film, I found myself constantly going like, I don't know what was going to happen. It was very tense throughout. And for a film that's, I want to say, about 2 hours and 12 minutes long, that's a very tough thing to do, to keep the tension up for that amount of time. I constantly felt on edge for something as innocuous as just someone turning the corner or opening the door. I always felt like something was going to happen through, I want to say, every other minute or 10 minutes. And it just kept me on the edge of my seat throughout the most seemingly mundane things, and this just shows just how masterfully executed this film is. And it obviously has a lot to say. There are some prominent social themes in there, and I think with how this is weaved into the story, which of course is obviously very very gripping, this it was one of those films that I just loved every single minute of. I never felt like it was dragging for just a second. There are a couple of beautifully or masterfully done action sequences in there. One of which, and I don't want to give away too much, but there's one sequence that contrasts how one family looks at things, the poorer family versus the richer family, when it's just something as common as a rainstorm. Parasite turns out to be one of those films that I absolutely just loved every single minute of. And I couldn't believe just what I saw when I walked out of the theater. That's how awesome, that's how amazing this movie is. Okay, number 3, Uncut Gems. Uncut Gems, I reviewed this film on the premiere of the show, so without getting into without meandering too much or just repeating myself too much, what Adam Sandler is the anchor of this film. He is absolutely miraculous, hopefully an Oscar-worthy performance. What stands out other than his performance is, of course, this sense of manic craziness. This film feels like it's going everywhere, but it feels like it's a streamlined and controlled chaos. That way, the film doesn't feel too messy. It's unpredictable, but not messy, and that's the big takeaway from this film. It shreds your nerves, shreds them to pieces, and as much as it feels like it's going all over the place, it feels like it's going all over the place in the best way possible, because that sense of going all over the place contributes to the nerve-inducing chaos that this film puts on full display. Okay, number 2, The Lighthouse. The Lighthouse is one of those films that I'm honestly very surprised that it's not doing better than it is its award season. I can't say it's doing horrible. It's getting some little stuff here and there, but I think it's not getting nearly as much as it deserves. This film follows two wikis, I'm not even sure what to call them. They call them wikis. Two lighthouse workers that are basically just stranded on this lighthouse island for 2 weeks, and the two of them clash and butt heads and drive each other mad and test each other throughout the entire duration of this tenure, tending this lighthouse. And this film got me very much in the mood for Halloween. I'm happy I saw it before Halloween, because it's very chilling, it's very eerie, but at the same time it's also it's pretty much just a straight outright nosedive into insanity. You start to wonder exactly what's going on, what exactly are these characters seeing, is this all real, is this all just like, hallucination, creepy and somewhat unsettling. But on top of all of that scary, unsettling nature, all that scary, unsettling stuff, and that manages to be a very, very funny movie. I kid you not, it's not above it's not above fart jokes, which I thought was really funny. There were scripted farts in the film. They could be having like this very serious conversation, or someone could be, or one character could be telling the other character to do something, and out of nowhere they'll just fart. It's just it's not the kind of movie that you would expect this in, but at the same time it still works very well. It's another very ambitious production. I look at the conditions that this film portrays. There's a lot of, of course, it's filmed on like an island. There's a lot of harsh weather, and there's a lot of times where this harsh weather like just breaks into the scene, and I can't help but wonder how they managed to achieve all of this. This is another film where I constantly ask myself, how did they do that? On top of the production, the lead performance, the cast basically consists of Robert Pattinson and Willem Dafoe, who are absolutely incredible in this film. You would think that Robert Pattinson, this guy, mostly known for Twilight, even though he's been doing very well with making a name for himself outside of Twilight, you would think that he wouldn't be able to compete or hold the same stature against someone like Willem Dafoe, a great character actor who's been around for a very long time. But no, Robert Pattinson absolutely holds his own very well, and both of them together just knock it out of the park. They're a great clashing duo. And finally, my number 1 film of 2019 is The Irishman. The Irishman follows the life and times of Frank the Irishman Sheeran, who After a long and prolific career in the mob, he also served as a war veteran in World War II. He discusses his alleged involvement in the disappearance of iconic American Union laborer Jimmy Hoffa. Now, a lot of people have been complaining about the 3.5 hour runtime, and why I feel the film earns its runtime is because the story covers so much ground. You have how, of course, Frank, played by Robert De Niro, comes into his own as a mobster. You have him developing his relationships with Italian mobster boss Russell Buffalino, played by Joe Pesci. You have him developing his relationship with the iconic Jimmy Hoffa, played by Al Pacino. All three of them are absolutely fantastic in this film, with Joe Pesci having my favorite performance in the entire film. In a film full of so many fantastic performances. Another reason why I feel like this film earns a runtime is because of how it's pieced together. Even though it definitely feels like it's taking its sweet time with certain things, it never feels like it's being too slow. It never feels like it's dragging, and a lot of that has to do with the very slick editing that Thelma Schoonmaker was in charge of. Scorsese's longtime collaborator, the slick editing courtesy of Thelma Schoonmaker, Martin Scorsese's longtime collaborator, his longtime editor, and this, to me personally, can easily rank with Martin Scorsese's best films. I look back at the career of Martin Scorsese, and one of the many reasons why he's my favorite filmmaker, this film reaffirmed that yet again, but one of the reasons why he's my favorite filmmaker is that he's been in the business, he's been a big name in the business since the 70s. And he's managed to make films that can arguably be called masterpieces each decade that he's been in the business. 70s, there was Taxi Driver. 80s, there was Raging Bull. 90s, there was Goodfellas. 2000s, there was The Departed. And 2010s, there was The Wolf of Wall Street, in my opinion, and now The Irishman. I think it's incredible that someone who's been in the business as long as him, as 76 years old, still can make a film with the same amount of gusto as if he was a younger man. And one of the things, and he actually manages to make this film feel different than his other films. The reason why is that this film takes a very contemplative and emotional and even just a meditative approach to the mobster story. This shows Frank Sheeran looking back on his life and basically coming to terms with the decisions that he's made in his life. And even though this is a guy who obviously did some very, very horrible things, and this film in no way supports what he does, at the same time, it humanizes him. And when you humanize someone that usually isn't so down to earth, that usually isn't meant for us to necessarily relate to, it's pretty powerful. It's a lot more powerful than you would think, just looking at it at surface level. On top of that, there's a lot of things that Scorsese is known for that is in this film. There's a soundtrack full of solid old goodies that your grandparents would love, that help establish the setting so well and pull you into the scene. There's a lot of wise guy humor. It's people snapping back and forth with each other. That's always hilarious, and especially in his films. And even on a technical front, what they managed to do with the visual effects. Some people were having some complaints with this, whether it's how young De Niro actually looks or just the color of his eyes. I thought what they were able to pull off of this was, I think, groundbreaking is a great word to describe it. I think it was pulled off to masterful effect. Now, even though there were certain points where, De Niro, of course, moves like an old man when he's supposed to look younger, I think for the larger effect that this film was going for, I think I'm willing to give that a pass, because this film has to do a lot with looking back on your life after you've lived most of it and coming to terms with whether or not you're satisfied with it. And I think that if you casted someone younger, or if you casted different actors to play each particular point in Frank Sheeran's life, it wouldn't have had the same effect, because, of course, De Niro is another person in the entertainment industry who's lived out most of his career, and I think when you're at that point in your career, you're able to look at, you're basically able to relate to looking back on what you've done throughout your life and whether or not you're basically okay with everything you've done. And just like that, another episode of Real Talk has come and gone. If you ever have any questions, concerns, or anything that you'd love for me to cover on the show, don't be afraid to reach out to me through my social media handles, all of which should be in the description for this podcast. And that's it for today. Thank you all for tuning in. This has been Real Talk.